Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature video number 160. Yes, the big 160. How to hold circles for developing mediumship at home. Interesting work, fairly short, I think 42 pages if I remember correctly. Actually more relevant for two reasons apart from trying to teach you mediumship. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books, blogs. There are some other works on sort of spiritualism, seances, and things like that, mostly in the mysticism category, so you can peruse that at your leisure. There are definitely some other good works available. This particular work, when I read it, when I was editing it, I always read the work while editing, was interesting to me for two purposes. Number one, the literary buff in me, I suppose, and another one, the general occultist. Neither of those having to do with seances. Of course, if we look back, the practice of seances and spiritualism along with it largely dies out in the fairly early 20th century. Why? Because a bunch of mediums and psychics are exposed as frauds, including Blavatsky herself, exposed as doing parlor tricks, you know, the rapping on the table and the ectoplasm and magical letters and stuff. It was all basically fraudulent. Therefore, spiritualism, which had been philosophical in part, died along with it, despite the fact that the kernel of what had originally been had nothing to do with like charlatan mediumship. When I read through this, I was more interested, number one, in the fact that it's a perfect example of the east to west sort of, using mindfulness, self-awareness, ruminating on things. So the idea of chanting, of chanting the same thing over and over, very much a sort of an Eastern practice, as opposed to Western-style invocations that were more theatrical, if you read some of the grimoires. The Asian invasion, you might call it, of Western sort of spiritual constructs. Number two, though, the literary buff in me really liked the fact that this is probably the perfect example of the kind of spirituality that was in vogue at the time. Short, how-to works, a lot of spiritual inclusions, some of the language is a little bit spooky-woo at times, and I've encountered other works that are like that. Even the Book of Forbidden Knowledge, which is, literally the best-selling work that I've ever released. It's a good work. Some of it does come from authentic grimoires, especially like the talismanic material, I believe sort of overlaps with the Enchiridion of all things. No, but some of it, the seance section is a little bit spooky-woo. Somehow, oh, here's how you amaze your friends by talking to your dead relatives and stuff like that. It's like, jury's out on that. I'm not a big believer in seances and contact with spirits in the sense that they generally held it at the time. Spiritual forces, yes. Spirits as in deliberately the conscious remnant of the departed, not so much. But it's an excellent period work. And the mindfulness techniques that it teaches are still very much in use today. The idea of simple self-awareness, of sort of awareness of one's self, their thoughts, and so forth, ruminating on the spiritual in order to slowly garner this focusing capability to clear your mind in order to, not just conduct a seance, but do really anything, including non-spiritual things, I think is number one, very positive, and number two, quite interesting, because it does come from outside of the European diaspora. Doesn't come from Europe. That's not really spoken of for the most part. The closest thing you have is fasting, being chaste, and sort of meditating on Jesus, and that comes from before, Hermetic circles and things like that, the Rosicrucians, some of these other sort of manifestos throughout time that are quite interesting. So again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Again, second and third links are to my books, blogs. Highly recommended, but not so much as a guide to mediumship, although if you do want to use it for that, it does purport in multiple lessons to actually impart that capability. That's about all. Peace out.